Hello, welcome to the Maya Toolbelt. This is Michael. Today we're continuing with our UV editor tools. You can find the UV editor in lots of different ways, but one way is to go to the Polygons tab, and on the far right there's this green box with kind of a checkerboard box in the middle here. You can click that button and it'll open the UV editor, and that's what this is. We've been talking about the UV editor for a while now, looking at different UV editing tools. And in the tool menu, you can see the list here. We've gone over pretty much all of these. The last one on the list is what we're talking about today, which is the Pen UV tool. And I'll open the options for that tool so we can see our tool settings. So like all these tools, before I can demonstrate any of them, I need to have something in my scene. And like I've been doing, I'm going to go to the Sculpting tab, open the visor for Sculpting Base Meshes. I'll choose one of these objects at random, right click on it, import into my scene, and I have this hammer. It looks like Thor's hammer from the Avengers or something like that. And it's composed of different parts, so whichever part I select, that will be the part that will be displayed in the UV editor. So I'll just choose the hammer itself, open the UV editor again, and you can see the hammer there. Now the reason why the hammer is only taking up a small section of the UV editor's positive X and Y quadrant is because whenever I have all of them selected, then you'll see all the components laid out with their UV. So in order to see it all at once, I'm going to select all the pieces of the hammer, go to my modeling menu set, and under the mesh menu, I'll choose the combine command. That will combine all my objects together into one object. So now I don't have to worry about clicking multiple things. I can just select it once, open the UV editor, and now I can see all the different pieces. So, Pen UV tool also could be referred to as the Freeze UV tool. And you can see it looks like a little snowflake icon on my UV toolbar. And also here in the tool settings, you can see it's called Freeze UV tool. But Freeze UV tool and Pen UV tool are the same tool. I get this kind of brush outline around my cursor whenever I have the tool active, and it only really shows up whenever I mouse over a UV shell. All these different pieces displayed in the UV editor are all UV shells for the hammer. So let's look at our settings. We have a size slider. Default value is 0.1, and that's literally the size of my brush that is surrounding my cursor. And I can hold down the B key, left click, and drag left and right, and I can dynamically choose the size of my brush that way, or you can use the slider itself and change your brush size that way. I kind of prefer using the dynamic way, holding down the B key, left clicking, and dragging. Then we have our strength slider, and the strength will be the strength of what we're about to do, which is Pen UVs. Let me zoom in like this. I'm going to make my brush a little smaller since I am closer to the UVs. So watch what happens as I left click and drag over this UV shell. You can see I kind of start to paint a blue color across the UVs. I'm just going to do this little section over here. And you can see how my brush has a soft edge to it. So the brush effect is kind of falling off at the edge of my brush, and it's not as strong, and the gradient of the blue to clear is kind of bleeding out this way. Okay, so keep that in mind. And the harshness of the blue color, or how intense it is, or how much of a percentage of blue I'm painting, is the strength slider. And right now it's 100% is what that 100 value means. So I'm painting 100% blue over the UVs. Now what blue color does, if I choose the select tool, or the Q key, right click and choose UVs as my selection component type, and let's say I grab these UVs over here that are not colored blue and I move them, you can see they move like normal. If I choose a selection of UVs that includes the ones that are painted blue, and then I left click and drag to move them, you can see that only the ones outside of the blue region will move. All the UVs that have been painted blue are pinned or frozen. They will not be modified by my movement. But you do kind of notice the bleed effect of the blue, that those UVs are moving, but they're moving slower than the rest. They have a kind of percentage effect of that pin, so that they're not 100% pinned, but they're not 0% either. That effect kind of bled through to these UVs here. So as I move the UVs that have no blue on them, the ones that have a little bit of blue move slower. They kind of get pulled behind, and then the ones that are 100% blue or pinned don't move at all. Let me undo all that movement. So that's literally the gist of how the freeze UV tool or pin UV tool works. You left click and drag over UVs to pin them into place so that they do not move or do not change based on any of your other actions. So you can adjust your brush size, you can adjust the strength. For example, I can lower the strength value down. If I go over here and paint, you can see that that blue is not quite so harsh unless I just paint over it and over it and over it, and I'm adding to the blue color. If I just go over it once though, you can see that the blue or the freezing effect is very subtle because my strength is much lower. Let me undo all of that. And then we have invert. Invert is the inverse of what I've been doing. If I left click and drag now on my clear UVs, nothing happens. But if I left click and drag on my pinned ones or frozen ones, you can see it's like an eraser. I'm erasing the effect of the blue or the pin on those UVs that I'm dragging over. Let me increase this back up to 100 because it controls the strength of the erasure of the erasing just as much as it does the strength of the painting. That's with invert. And again, uncheck it, I can paint blue back on. Check it, I can erase it. Now either way, if you hold down the control key, your cursor will do the opposite of whatever you're doing. Right now invert is not checked, so when I left click and drag, I'm painting blue on. If I hold down control though, that is invert. That will invert the effect without having to check the invert box. If invert is checked, and I hold down control and left click, now I'm painting blue on, which is the opposite of the inverted effect. And when I hold that, let go of control, left click and drag, now because my effect is inverted, I'm erasing it. Hopefully that makes sense. Whatever you're not doing, whatever setting you have not chosen, control will do that effect when you hold it down, hold down control and left click while invert is turned off to invert the effect. Hopefully it's not too confusing. You can essentially, with invert unchecked, hold down control to erase. So left click and drag to paint on, hold down control, left click and drag to erase. And if you invert the tool, it is the opposite. Hopefully that's clear. Then we have these two buttons. We have unpin all and invert pin. If I were to paint some pin effect or freeze effect on some UVs and then choose the invert pin button, whatever I have painted here, the entire UVs, the entire set of UVs I have selected will reverse to be the opposite of whatever is currently affected. So if I choose invert pin, then you'll see everything else becomes pinned while the area that I painted is no longer pinned. Okay, so you can invert the effect with this button. And then there's unpin all. If you want to remove the effect 100% off of everything so that there's no pinning happening, you can choose the unpin all button. So that's the main gist of the tools here in the brush area for the freeze UV or pin UV tool. Let's go down here to display. You see I have this checkbox for show brush ring during stroke, and literally that means the ring around my cursor. You can see it's like a black circle, and as I left click and drag, you can still see the black circle. But if I uncheck this, left click and drag, that circle goes away while I am painting the effect on. Or if we check it, then the circle is visible while I'm painting. I'll unpin all and keep that checked. And then we have this Falloff section, and this is the same Falloff tools as I've talked about in other UV editor tools that have a brush effect. Please feel free to take a look at the grab UV tool video where I go into it in the fullest detail. but it essentially controls the profile of your brush. With the default settings, you can see here as I have made a stroke that the center of my brush has a greater effect than the outer ring of my brush, and that's what this profile curve controls. If I were to choose a different profile, such as this one, which has no fall off at all, I should get a harsh full circle like this when I paint. So those are the two differences in those two profiled settings. And you can choose different profile shapes. So this profile has a weaker stroke effect than the default one, and much weaker than the full stroke effect like this one has. Reset tool, and it's back to its default values. So yeah, that's the pen UV tool. If you ever have UVs in your scene that you've laid out the way you want them, and you want to make certain that nothing you do will accidentally move them, no modifiers to other UVs, you don't accidentally select them and move them, you can simply pin them or freeze them, and then they'll no longer be affected by anything you do, and they will stay frozen like they are. So I highly recommend using this tool whenever you are laying out your UVs and you get them how you like them, or if you get like a part of it the way you like it but you still want to change a portion of it still, you can freeze the ones you want to keep the way they are and then adjust the others. In any case, thank you again for watching. That's the end of the tool menu here in the UV editor. I might go over one or two more things just to kind of wrap up this category that we've been talking about for a while, and I think I'll move on to something else pretty soon. Please feel free to comment if you have something in mind that you'd really like me to talk about sooner than later. The plan is, of course, for the Maya Toolbelt's goal as a channel is to get a video going over everything eventually. Of course, that's a tall order, but I'm working on it. Thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you later.